I would like to start by saying that this virtual webinar series connects Dominican and U.S. higher education institutions during this COVID-19 pandemic. Through this series, higher education institutions have the opportunity to share their knowledge, wisdom, and best practices and improve their potential to implement joint research and academic exchange activities. Well, thank you again for being here. And now to officially kick off this event, I'd like to welcome Carolina Escalera, Press Attaché of the U.S. Embassy in Santo Domingo.
Buenas tardes. Good afternoon to all. Thanks for joining us today. On behalf of the U.S. Embassy in Santo Domingo, I am pleased to welcome you to the 9th webinar in our higher education series. It's a pleasure to be with you all today to explore more information on offering successful online education. Promoting access to high quality education is one of our key priorities at the Embassy. I'm happy that Mr. Brad Skillman, Deputy Director of the Emergency Management and Homeland Security Program, and Mr. Jarrett Broder, the Director of Special Projects for the Emergency Management and Homeland Security Program at Florida State University, go Seminoles, I'm from Tallahassee, but are here today with us to present ideas and tools for engaging students and to discuss synchronous versus asynchronous learning. I hope I said that right. They will also describe what works for a given audience using outside tools to enhance learning, simulators, games, and other enhancements. Fulbright alumna and educational technology instructor Denisse Cruz will serve as a moderator for today's discussion. So thank you, Mr. Brad Skillman and Mr. Jarrett Broder, for sharing your time and experience with us today. I'm excited to see the opportunities for collaboration that arise from this series of virtual seminars. Again, thank you all. Muchas gracias y estamos unidos.
Thank you, Carolina. Well, I would like to start by introducing our panelists today. Mr. Brad Skillman is the Deputy Director of the Emergency Management and Homeland Security Program at Florida State University. He has a bachelor's degree in political science from Eckerd College and a master's degree in international affairs from Florida State University. He is involved in the teaching of the Introduction to Terrorism, Public Health, and Homeland Security courses. Mr. Skillman strives to keep his courses as current and future-facing as much as possible. He encourages students to dig deeper behind the headlines and understand how events, tools, and policies are affecting people on the ground and consider future ramifications. In his courses, especially in the era of COVID-19, his focus is on creating tools to better engage students, both in the classroom and remotely. Discussions, roundtable, engaging virtual team projects, videos, and even games can be used to keep students engaged. Welcome, Mr. Skillman.
Thank you for having me.
And now to introduce our panelist, Mr. Jarrett Broder. He is the Director of Special Projects for the Emergency Management and Homeland Security Program at Florida State University, and he's also the Deputy Director for the Center for Disaster Risk Policy, CDRP. In these roles, he oversees all the information technology needs of both organizations. Mr. Broder holds a Master's of Science from Florida State University in Information Technology. Mr. Broder is a member of the Disaster Incident Research Team, or DIRT, and is one of the primary faculty members for the EMHS CDRP Unmanned Aircraft Systems program. He has led research teams domestically and internationally, performing a wide range of traditional emergency management and UAS-related research. Welcome, Mr. Broder.
Thank you. I'm very excited to be here.
Well, whenever you're ready, let's start.
I'll begin by sharing my screen. Okay. Thank you again for having us here today. My name, as she said, is Brad Skillman. I'll start very briefly by talking about our topics for today. We're going to look primarily at the differences between synchronous and asynchronous, a couple of hints to keep students engaged. That's my portion, and then Mr. Broder is going to talk about some outside virtual field work and tools as well. About 2 weeks ago, we had 2 other colleagues do a similar sort of presentation about developing a certificate program. If you were here for that, you got to learn a lot of details about our program. I'll give you just a few of them so you kind of understand where we're coming from. We teach about 1,600 students in the fall and spring semesters and about 800 in the summer semester, so we're working all year round. Of those numbers, about 1/4 of them are in the classroom before the COVID era, and the remainder, 3/4, are online students. Prior to COVID-19, all of our online courses were asynchronous courses, which we'll talk about. But with COVID-19, we've been forced to go entirely online, so we have a mix of synchronous and asynchronous courses online. And as I said there, we've been doing this for over 20 years and been developing for a long time in our certificate programs. I'll start with just a very quick couple comparisons between the 2 different online models. Synchronous models are the ones that most closely resemble being in the classroom with your students. You hold a live lecture, usually via something like Zoom, and your students attend as well. Oftentimes, instructors will also have assignments with very narrow windows, like you have to take an assignment at a certain time on a certain day. And sometimes they use tools like the Honor Lock program, if you've heard of that, to create that secure testing environment. The asynchronous courses, the ones that we prefer to use online and our students seem to prefer to use online, are probably the best way of describing is using a lot of recordings. We post our PowerPoint lectures, we post short introductory videos, sometimes longer videos of us reading through the slides, and those are available to the students at any time. They can view these recordings, look at these slides whenever they have the time in their busy lives to get it done. Usually our assignments also have large windows. For example, I have a window usually Friday to Friday, so 7-day window. A student has to find an hour at some point in that window to take their exam or their quiz. The synchronous models, of course, require a lot of the same things that are required of you when you're teaching in the classroom. You have to be there at a preset time. You have to be prepared at a preset time as the instructor. And of course, as the students, they also have to be there at a preset time. This works very well for your traditional students that need that stable environment. They need that time to be somewhere at a specific day. It also, of course, works best for instructors that prefer that as well. They like to keep themselves on that tight connection. Probably the biggest downside to this is the internet requirement for doing so. We have students, even in the US, who struggle with the ability to get online with the proper technology and to have the connection, the bandwidth to stream these videos. That's probably the biggest hurdle you have for these synchronous courses. These students are probably already prepared to be somewhere at a certain time, but the ability to do that online may be a bit of a struggle, especially when they're scattered to the 4 corners because of COVID. As I mentioned, the asynchronous really leans on that flexibility option, but this requires students to be their own masters and to maintain their own schedules. Often when students struggle in our program for these asynchronous courses, it's because they just can't simply keep themselves on schedule. They'll just forget to look at the slides, they'll forget to do the work, and suddenly it's the end of the semester and they're playing catch up. For professional students, your adult learners, people with children at home, especially now with COVID-19, schools being closed, this asynchronous model is incredibly powerful. because they can look at your slides, they can look at your videos, they can take your tests, your exams, anytime that they have the time throughout the day, on the weekend, on their lunch break. Whenever they can find the time in their lives, they can engage with your class. And this can also be handy if students have limited internet. If they're using something like an internet cafe, or if they need to go to the library, or if the best internet they have is at work, they can download all of your class materials and then take it home and use it as they need, as they see fit when they can. Usually the work they might have to do online doesn't require as heavy of a connection as streaming a video service would. So that's pretty much the main comparison between the two of them. They both serve the same audience. We have, I would say, the majority of our students that take asynchronous courses were living on campus or living in the city of Tallahassee around campus. These weren't students who were abroad or living in other parts of Florida or the country. They were local students that just wanted that flexibility in their lives. This can also be a powerful tool for international students or students who are living in other places in the country. We have students who complete our certificate that live in other parts of Florida. We have students that live in other parts of the country, and we've had students from other parts of the world because they're able to do everything online, and there's really no need to worry about things like time zones and time changes because you can do your work whenever you have the ability to. It doesn't matter what time it is for us, the time's good for them. And it's also a little nice for instructors too, because if you get really sidetracked on a Monday and you can't upload your slides until a Tuesday, your students are pretty forgiving because you don't have that set time to be somewhere. I tried to think of the most important lessons that I could give for teaching online, regardless if it's synchronous or asynchronous. And the one that I kept coming back to was communication. I think it's pretty difficult to over-communicate for online courses. This is especially true for students that don't necessarily want to be online or don't necessarily want to take asynchronous courses. The more work that you put in ahead of time for instructions in your syllabi, in your rubrics and assignments, the more that's going to save you on the back end because students can read those things and feel comfortable that they're not making mistakes. I consider all of those to be living documents that evolve over time and evolve even during the semester. You can see down there at the bottom of the slide, that's just a portion of some of my paper instructions. It is obscenely detailed, and many of you are probably rolling your eyes at the level of detail, but that has saved me a lot of trouble because students have very clear expectations of what they need to do, and I don't have questions about what font they should use, the margins, everything like that. It's all very clearly written out for them. And that saves me a lot of emails that I have to answer and a lot of bad grades that I have to give in the future. The primary counter to this, or I think maybe the most important thing to consider with this, is you need to carve out time for yourself. You have to protect your free time. I have two little kids, they're 2 and 6. Mr. Broder also had 2 children, a little bit older. But everyone in our lives, our spouses, our children, and yours as well, and just yourself, you need your downtime, and you need to protect your own downtime. So you can see there, we have in our syllabus that sentence that will respond within 48 hours. So don't feel like you need to get swamped in the communication. You have to always be checking your emails and responding. Create that space for you to breathe. It might make for a busy Monday morning, but it will make your life a lot better on the back end while you're living on your weekends and your nights. In terms of keeping students involved, the lesson I give to instructors that traditionally don't teach online is most of the students you're going to teach to the younger generations are in some ways more comfortable existing and communicating in that online space than you are and that they may be in person. So don't be afraid to use that online space because they will communicate there. They're used to communicating, via FaceTime or via chat messages on discussion boards. They're used to that. That's their habitat, that's their space. And they do best, of course, when you break them out into smaller groups. If you're doing a synchronous course, I love using breakout rooms. And I love giving them things to talk about that are a little contentious, things that need debate, things that students might have different opinions on. And I'm always happily surprised that when I'm giving a lecture and the students seem kind of disconnected or not asking a lot of questions, I put them in the breakout rooms and suddenly they're talking a lot. They're talking over each other. They're so excited to talk about it. And sometimes they don't want to ask the question to larger rooms. Sometimes they just feel weird interacting with the old fogey professor. So being amongst your peers is a really powerful tool. And you can do this asynchronously as well. You can use discussion boards to drive debate and discussion. I like to have my students actually review each other's papers and ask questions, usually when it's like a position paper. I have their fellow students challenge their position so that the author and the students learn how to defend their positions, but also really challenge each other and get better at what they're doing. And when you're in that space as the instructor, I highly suggest being as minimal and unobtrusive as you possibly can. The analogy I always give is the kind of free flow of information and how comfortable you are working with your peers. If you work in a university setting, working with your fellow faculty, but as soon as your dean walks into the room, you clam up and you stop talking. And it's the same way for your students. So when I move into their group chats, when I move into their breakout rooms, my camera is muted, my mic is turned off, and I make it my purpose to be there just to listen. And it works really well. The students kind of forget you're there and they just keep talking amongst themselves. I very rarely have to moderate them to keep them in line or to make sure they're being respectful. Again, you'd be surprised. I know we hear so much about how being online, people are so rude to each other, but these college students, when they're engaged like this, especially face-to-face, via a video call, they do really well together and they really interact with each other. And I constantly have students telling me that they feel like they have a better grasp of the information once they've had a chance to talk to their peers about it or ask me more detailed questions in a breakout room. Those asynchronous students are going to struggle with that. So that's where your office hours and your emails come in, or maybe making videos to help explain hard topics. And I forgot to mention, this is the last thing I'll say, forgive me, in terms of the synchronous and asynchronous model. The synchronous is probably best when you have a course. I like to think of something like engineering or chemistry, where you need to constantly check for understanding with your students. Is this example making sense? Are you understanding what I'm writing down? Students need that interaction. You need to be live with them. You need to be synchronous with them. For things in the social science realm, we found that being asynchronous is a really powerful tool, and students will learn a lot and succeed based simply on that asynchronous model. I think that's the end of my slides. I look forward to any questions you might have, and I'm going to stop sharing and turn it over to Jarrett Broder for his portion.
Thanks, Brad. Let me get my my screen sharing set up here. How does that look? Can everyone see my my screen here? All right, good. So now that Mr. Skillman has discussed some of the ways we handle the online delivery of lecture classroom classes, I'm going to talk to you for a bit about how we deliver content to our students who would normally be in a more hands-on learning environment. One of the ways we've learned to deliver classroom content was kind of by accident. A number of our faculty are part of the state of Florida's emergency response team and are regularly called upon to respond to emergencies, not only in Florida, but in neighboring states as well. Normally, we would have to cancel class on days we're in the field, but a few years ago, we had the bright idea to do a live broadcast from the field. So long as we were in a place that had reliable internet service, we were able to connect with students via a number of methods. Now, before the widespread integration of Zoom at Florida State University, we had tried other technologies like Google Hangouts, Teams, GoToMeeting, and we've even held class via a conference call when the internet wasn't strong enough to carry his video signal. So long as the students were able to hear you, there's no reason you can't deliver a lecture or some kind of description of the activities you're engaging in. I can't think of a better way to bring theory into the realm of practice than to give my students a blow-by-blow account of where I am, what I'm doing on a deployment, especially when it pertains to the class material we're covering for the semester. You can see on this slide here, there are some pictures of myself and some of our other faculty from just a few weeks ago when we were deployed out to Orange County, Texas for Hurricane Laura. In the first photo here, I'm recording a video for our students to show them how we prepare one of our fixed-wing drones for aerial reconnaissance. Then I did a quick interview with one of the GIS specialists from the U.S. National Forest Service. That recorded video will get edited and delivered to classes later in the semester. That third picture on this slide is my director setting up for a live broadcast we did from the field for our disaster systems class. Again, so long as you have a good data connection where you are, you can broadcast from practically anywhere. Don't have good data, you can still record yourself engaging in research or real-world activities. Now, we're pretty lucky to have very good equipment, and I'll be honest, we weren't just using phones or Wi-Fi hotspots for doing these particular broadcasts. As you can see in that middle picture there, when we go into the field, we bring the internet with us. But that doesn't mean you can't start small and then ramp up how you deliver your content remotely. We very strongly believe in the mantra, crawl, walk, run. That is to say, start small and then ramp up how you deliver content as you see a benefit. There's no reason you can't experiment with doing all of this. And in my opinion, it only took a few minutes to set up, took a little bit out of the day to get these things lined up. And I'll admit, the first couple of times we did this, I felt kind of silly doing it. But when you hear feedback from your students about how cool it was to see their professors actually doing the things they teach in the classroom, you don't feel so silly about doing it anymore. So as you've seen on the previous slide, we teach drone classes. One of the classes we teach in our department is the first in a series of classes towards our certificate in the application of unmanned aircraft systems. This entry-level class is about 98% traditional classroom activity with a couple of classes at the end of the semester where we actually take the students to fly drones. This allows the students to get a hands-on feel for the aircraft and get them excited to take the next class towards the certificate. As we transitioned classes to an online delivery platform, we were met with the challenge of trying to figure out how we were going to give our students hands-on experience with the tools and the hardware they would eventually have to use in upcoming classes. Enter simulators and games. Simulators and games give students an opportunity to participate in activities that would normally be held in person. Let's take the examples I've got here. These are two software packages that our students need to learn in order to program aircraft for autonomous flight. In a traditional in-person classroom environment, we'd have the students plan out their missions and then fly them. To get around the problem of not being able to meet with them face-to-face, we're able to allow the students to run this software on their own computers to plan out their flight missions, save them, and then submit them to the instructor for a grade. Both of these applications have the added benefit of allowing not only the instructor but the student to run their mission programs as a simulation to see if there would be any problems with their intended mission programs. Now, there are plenty of artificialities we can't accommodate for, but this at least gives us an idea of whether or not students understand the fundamental principles we're trying to teach them. We're able to evaluate their understanding of these concepts and give them a grade for a practical demonstration of their abilities. Another idea we're planning to experiment with is asking our students to install a game on their computer. That first picture on this slide is of a very popular gaming platform controller, which I'm sure most of you might recognize. You'll notice it's very similar to the actual flight controller we use to fly most of our aircraft, which is pictured in the middle there. It isn't a very big leap for students already familiar with gaming systems to translate what they know from gaming to actual flying. That's where the game comes in. You can see in the third picture here a screenshot of what the game looks like. The user is even provided with a graphical representation of what a traditional drone controller looks like and how it acts when manipulated. Now, full disclosure here, The drones we operate for public safety are a lot different than the racing drones users get to use in the game, but it's the most realistic platform we've found for helping students gain the muscle memory required to operate these aircraft when they can't fly them in person. All right, 2 examples cover simulators we can use with online delivery. This 3rd example is more of what we call a game. Normally, we're able to take students at least once a year on an overseas research trip. However, with travel restrictions in place, we're not able to do that right now. To overcome this problem, we've developed a game the students play that puts them through the paces of having to split up into functional groups who are responsible for planning, logistics, financials, and operations. These are also the functional groups that make up the incident command system used in most disasters in the US. For the purposes of this game, the students are given a mission, usually to conduct a research project our department has already completed. The purpose for doing it this way is that we've already been there, we've already done it, we already know the problems they're going to face. We know the barriers, what the barriers are, and what the students must do to complete the mission. The instructor plays the role of the client, regulators, and anyone else the students might have to interact with in order to complete their mission. The majority of the interaction happens over email, as it normally would, or via phone calls. We do not make this easy for the students. This is a perfect opportunity for instructors to get creative and create real-world barriers that students must overcome using the knowledge and tools they've learned in our classes. At the end of the semester, student groups must take all of their planning materials and present it to the class for a grade. Now, I know most of my examples here have been very emergency management and UAS specific. So I also wanted to provide an example of a simulation site that's a bit outside of my area of expertise, but kind of a 2-for-1 special when it comes to tools. The site Myphysicslab Com is a website that allows students to experiment with different materials to see how they interact with each other. This is not only a great site for demonstrating physics and other science topics, but it also offers all the source code used to run the simulations. This is a great way for students in mathematics and computer science to learn how physics engines work and the math required to run simulations. All of the source code on this site is open source under the Apache 2.0 license, and online documentation for the code is also provided. So we've already discussed some of the pros here for why you would want to use simulators in games, but one of the things I really wanted to touch on was cost. If there are applications that instructors want to use in their classes, my own personal experience is that you can reach out to the software companies and inquire about educational licenses. A lot of times companies offer free or deeply reduced licenses to teachers that want to use their software in the classroom, but they don't always tell you or advertise that on their websites. If you can't find any information on their website about educational use, I always find it's best to contact them directly to inquire. You'll be surprised at how many companies are more than happy to get software into the hands of potential customers via the classroom. Finally, we've talked about the good, and so now we'll talk about the bad. Some of these simulators have intensive hardware requirements or are platform specific, meaning they'll only run on Windows or only run on one mobile operating system like Android versus iOS. If it's something you're going to require students to do, you should make sure it's available on all platforms, or at least the major ones. We've also found that it can be difficult to capture the essence of what's really going on when students are engaged in some of these activities. Having an instructor there to help you with a problem as it's happening is sometimes the best learning experience, but you make do with what you've got. Which leads me to my final point, which is that simulators, games, and live streams just aren't the real thing, but it's the best we can do in situations where we can't be there face-to-face with our student. This brings us to the end of our presentation. I'd like to turn things back over to Denise for the question and answer portion of this presentation, and thank you all for having me.
Thank you so much, Mr. Broder and Mr. Skillman. I really enjoyed your presentation, and I also took notes on the side. for me, for my teaching practice. So thank you so much. We already have a lot of questions, so I'm gonna start right away with them. Start with this one. How do you manage course load and student schedules? And you can, either one of you can answer these questions, of course. So how do you manage course load and student schedules? And do students have several subjects at the time? Well, yes, we know that, you mentioned that, especially in higher education, but basically how you as teachers manage the course load and student schedules.
I guess I'll start. For the synchronous courses, it's relatively easy because you have that meeting time to tell them, here's what's coming up, here's what's due. For the asynchronous, again, it comes down to communication. I post weekly announcements describing what we're talking about that week and any assignments that are coming due. We we use Canvas as a tool provided through our university, and you can create assignment due dates in there. So it auto-generates a calendar for your students to follow. And again, those asynchronous students, if they are good about keeping to their own schedules, can succeed really well with just that little bit of help.
I'd also like to add that any student that requests a syllabus or has a question about how the class is going to be planned out, I would say all of our faculty have no problem providing those to the student before the classes start so that they can plan their own schedule and have an idea of what types of assignments are going to be due and when they're going to be due.
Awesome. Amarilis asks, would you recommend that tests are handed in asynchronously, if I can say it that way? Or don't you think this makes it easier for students to cheat or copy someone else's work?
Brad, why don't you take that one? Brad is our resident cheating expert, and he handles everything from cheating cells to websites that give out the information on our test. Brad, why don't you relay that information?
Yeah, unfortunately, that has become my unofficial role as the bad cop. It is, if you're going to do it live, synchronously, there are a couple of third-party tools. I mentioned that honor lock tool. That has a lot of problems. A lot of students struggle using that tool, and it has a lot of physical hardware requirements for the student. They need a webcam, sometimes they need a printer, they need a distraction-free space, so that can be a lot of work for a student. You can make something available for a very short amount of time if you want to try to make it difficult to cheat and kind of propagate information over time. One of the most powerful tools we use for our asynchronous tests is we build very large pools of questions, and students will get a randomized set of questions from that pool. I build pools per slide deck, so I'll make 30 questions per deck, for each deck, and a student might get 10 of those 30 on their exam, and the exam builds that way. So no two exams are going to like, so students can't directly cheat with one another. But I mean, it's kind of how much do you want to put on the student, how much do you want to track down the cheating, how hard do you want to clamp down on it. We've found that having that open book setting that has a narrow time limit, I usually give my students about an hour to take the exam, means that they can't just be looking everything up while the exam is live. They have to have prepared ahead of time. And then finally, we use, it's called Turnitin or Safe Assign via our Canvas tool that auto checks for any cheating for your papers. And that's an incredible tool that will catch students. Unfortunately, catches them not as much as we would like, but it does catch them pretty frequently. Or I should say, catches them more than we would like. That sounded awful. It catches them more than we would like. They cheat more often than we'd like.
Do you have, I'm so sorry.
I was also going to say, we've also seen issues where students will run a paper that they've written for another class through an online system that rewrites the paper for them to try and fool these automated systems we use for catching cheating. It's, you know, it it depends on how much you as the instructor how much time and effort you want to put into preventing students from cheating.
Do you have, and this is to answer Orlando's question on if you have like a preference of or a way that you prefer to hand out the test, or is it just like Q&A tests, or do you use or like project-based assessment? Do you have a preference for either one of those or any other?
I would say it depends on the course. My courses are mainly slide-based, so it's a lot of just kind of checking knowledge. I'll let Jarrett talk about the kind of more practical courses.
Yeah, so my, my philosophy is quizzes to reinforce readings, and a lot of the tests are usually essay-based, based on the lectures and classroom discussion. When doing the quizzes, I throw in a relative, equal sampling of fill in the blank, true or false, short answers, just to kind of, if a student has a problem with, an all essay test, now they can't complain because we've given them an opportunity to answer in a bunch of different formats. Mm-hmm. When it comes to the more hands-on classes that we teach, we normally have the students either do like a capstone project, but we're always trying to get them in front of people and presenting so that they'll develop those skills in addition to what they're learning in the class, because when they go out into the real world, they're going to have to do that. They're going to have to stand up in front of people, and they're going to have to present their ideas.
Right. I have an international question here. Which tools, games, and a lot of people have asked like what tools or games do you recommend, but which tools, games, or applications can I use to motivate or engage students as it is possible to collaborate with teachers from other countries? So, and if it's possible to collaborate with teachers from other countries, that was the question.
I'm not sure. I would probably try and go out into some sort of social media group with other teachers and find out from there what they're using. But my own experience, we're only a couple of months into COVID, so all of the partnering that we normally do is either through some sort of face-to-face introduction, or we worked with the Red Cross in this country and they know someone else in another country that has a project or a problem, and so our name gets forwarded on to do some sort of collaborative work with them. So I don't really have much more of a suggestion than that. Brad, do you have anything?
And yeah, we don't traditionally do that international collaboration or have our students do it. I'm thinking of a course we teach called Planning and Policy, where students, as their semester-long project, have to develop a disaster plan for a local business. So they are interacting locally. I imagine that you could expand that to be something along the lines of more broad, even internationally. We have a couple courses on international comparative emergency management. So you could have students write about a different country and their emergency management tools and system, and encourage them or require them to interact with experts or officials from those various countries that they're writing about as part of their paper or part of their assignment.
Awesome. Thank you. And someone asked, what's the name of the tool that you use for tests and quizzes that you mentioned before, Mr. Skillman?
Sure. Well, our university uses the Canvas tool. We used to use...
Okay, so that's the LMS that the university uses.
Exactly, yeah, and,
okay.
and Turnitin is part of Canvas. We used to use Blackboard as well. It had its own set of tools, but now we use Canvas.
Okay, so Turnitin. Thank you. They are asking a lot of questions like, how can I engage students to participate more actively in asynchronous learning? How can I keep their motivation up? How can I teach in a way that they don't fall asleep after the first 10 minutes or turn their camera off and you know what happens.
Yeah, it's definitely a challenge. And one of the things that I always do at the end of a class is I always ask for feedback from the students. We have something that we use in emergency management when we do the after action report for something that's gone on. We do, it's called 3 ups and 3 downs. So we ask the students to provide 3 things that they liked about the class and 3 things that they didn't like or they wish we could change. And we try to do this in a way where everyone's doing it all at the same time. We don't allow students to say the same thing. So if someone repeats something that someone else has already said, like, I don't like it that you make assignments due on Friday or something like that, we tell the students, well, you got to come up with something else you don't like. And it's through that feedback that we get a better understanding of what we're doing well and what the students want.
Okay, thank you. I had one here. So they are asking, oh my gosh, I had such a great question and I missed it. Give me just 1 second. Oh, they also asked if this methodology is, or which one is better to use with younger ages, like if it's preschoolers maybe, if you have any recommendations or preference for that age.
I'm actually gonna let Jarrett discuss that one. My oldest daughter is only in kindergarten, and we said she needed to go to the classroom because she can't sit at a computer long enough. But Jarrett has both of his children at home learning, so I'll let him answer that from his life experience.
So from my experience, not having to conduct the classes, but seeing how my children are going to school at home, they are 13 and 9, so they're elementary and middle school, about to enter high school. The elementary school teachers, I think, have a more difficult job ahead of them, especially with kids having shorter attention spans and just the nature of how elementary school is more of a face-to-face learning from the teacher as opposed to self-learning. I do think it presents some great opportunities for kids to learn sooner in life how to teach themselves how to do things and how to work independently. Perspective of the middle school kids, also a challenge, but with them matriculating through classes and having different teachers throughout the day, there's less responsibility for the teacher to constantly be on and engaging with them. But I mean, I'm just looking at it from the perspective of a parent. I'm not.
Well, but parents have played a huge role in this pandemic, working alongside
yes.
teachers. So
yes, and I give my wife a ton of credit for making sure that our children have everything they need to make sure that they can not only be online, but, you know, participate in whatever the activities are for the day.
And do you have any alternative tools, resources that you recommend to use instead of Zoom breakout rooms? For example, for those institutions that don't have access to a premium account?
Yeah, so we have in the past, as I said in my presentation, we've used a bunch of different technologies. I really love Google stuff. but unfortunately they keep changing the names of all their products. So it used to be Google Hangouts and now it's become something different. But we've also used Microsoft Teams. We've used Facebook Live, GoToMeeting, anything that offers an online collaborative environment. We've also used conference call systems. We primarily use those in times when we're not able to get a strong enough data signal, but it gives you pretty much all the controls that you're able to do in a video system without the actual video, where you can mute the participants or give people an opportunity to do kind of like a question and answer. So my suggestion is experiment. There's tons of choices out there. Experiment. Ask some colleagues to participate with you. Maybe if you've got some eager students that want some extra credit, you can ask them to engage this semester in trying out these technologies just to determine what works best for you.
Definitely. And I see someone saying that Teams does not have breakout rooms. I've used Teams myself, and it just names it differently, like channels or groups within a channel. But yeah, as Mr. Broder said, it's all about exploring the tool. I think we have time for one last question, and that one has come up several times. What about time? Like time in breakout rooms? I know Mr. Skillman mentioned it, but just to like remind our participants, like how should I manage time? How much time should I give them to work on their own and then come back to the general meeting? And yeah, basically that. How long should a session be in general?
Sometimes that's dictated just by how much time I have left in the class. Like I might lecture, I only have 20 minutes left for them to talk, so I got to kind of break that up. I also have experience where as I'm drifting as kind of like a ghost through each different room, I just kind of get the experience, like, are they still engaging with this, or are they talking about something else, or are they drifted off, not paying any more attention? And you can kind of just get the feel like they've naturally come to a conclusion. There's always that one group that's still talking forever, and you kind of just got to cut them off. But you'll be able to kind of feel when they've discussed it enough alone, and they're ready to come back. Or are you just up against time, which I usually am.
Mr. Broder, would you like to add anything to that question?
No, I think Brad pretty much covered everything for that question. Okay,
well, I think unfortunately we are done with the Q&A. I tried to summarize all of you guys' questions. Thank you so much to all of you who submitted your questions. I think it was Mr. Broder, well, you had the same presentation, but at the end on the last slide, you had your contact information. If you could share that with us again, that would be great. For anyone who would like to reach out. So there you go. You have your the contact information for Mr. Skillman and Mr. Broder. I also would like to remind you that we would be sending a follow-up email to all of you who registered for the webinar, so that you provide us with your feedback. You can find this video later on the link that we shared on the chat room here. And I don't know, maybe a few last words from our panelists, if you will.
Oh, I wasn't prepared for a speech.
I'm sorry.
No,
I put you on the spot.
It's fine. I was starting to relax. I probably the best thing I can say is that your students are going to be very forgiving as you learn through all of this. So, you may be learning new tools, learning new practices, trying to figure out how to do this best. How do you engage with your students? don't be afraid to experiment. Don't be afraid to engage them. As Jarrett said, don't be afraid to ask them for their feedback, even on a daily and meeting basis. That, you know, what's working best for you guys, what's not. You know, don't be afraid to just go at this with both hands and figure out what works best for you.
Yeah, I just want to reiterate some of the things Brad mentioned. You know, communication and feedback with students is key. You know, if you're really interested in building a class that students are interested in and aren't just taking because they have to, you know, check off something on their schedule that they took this class, then, you know, you're going to want to change the way you do things based on the feedback that they provide. And the other thing is, you know, if you're planning on using a technology, especially something that you're not familiar with, experiment, test, get other people involved, create focus groups, and make sure that you know what you're doing, because the minute you're kind of like fumbling around and you can't get things to work, that's immediately you're going to lose people's attention.
Oh, yeah. Thank you so much to our panelists. Thank you so much to everyone who joined us today. We already shared the link there, but it's the U.S. Embassy in the Dominican Republic YouTube channel that you can find this webinar later. So thank you so much, and may you have a nice rest of your day.
Thank you.